Doctora Araón, entonces ahorita que entren ya todos, les indico cómo va a funcionar esto de la interpretación.
Marty, Pamela, the Dean Pamela is already here. I can see.
Let me look.
Yeah.
No, and I could forward her the link just in case.
Yeah. Thank you.
Buenos días a todos. Para los asistentes les tenemos una información especial. Ustedes pueden consultar los canales de interpretación. Si se van en la parte inferior de su Zoom, ahí apareció un icono con un mundo. Le presionan ahí.
Yeah, she said the link's not working. I'm going to resend the link. Give me a second.
It's part of the dynamics, right? Luckily, yesterday everything went smoothly. Everything went according to plan. Let's hope that today will be like that. The thing is, there are some people who are very much used to Zoom meetings. For others, it is not so new. So they get nervous and they don't think straight. And there are so many languages Zoom offers, right, for translation purposes. It can be confusing. It takes some getting used to.
We can hear the translation, the translator.
So can you understand what I'm saying? In Spanish,
Yeah,
he says.
We can hear it in English.
También se oyen. We're about to begin soon. Thank you for your patience.
So I sent 2 links to the dean. She should be joining any second. Excellent. Good morning. Welcome. No problem. We'll get started. We'll be ready for you in about a minute or two. Yes.
Carlos, please go ahead. Hello, good morning. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Good morning, everyone. Pamela, good morning. Marty, good morning. Good morning, Araon. Good morning to all our brothers and sisters on the call and the people who are following us on the Facebook streaming at CSAN. This is the second day of the virtual colloquium, the counter narratives of marijuana, the role of artistic and visual studies in the approach to combat stigma. So we feel very pleased to have the second day after a first day that was extremely interesting, what we saw yesterday. Yesterday, we were able to realize that marijuana, cannabis, weed is very closely connected to the editorial business, music industry, poetry, political discourses of transformation of freedom, tolerance. And so today we will have this type of ideas in mind to go deeper in the discussions. I would like to especially thank Pamela and Marty for all the support, the outreach they've done with the anthropology department, the liberal arts and sciences from Colorado University at Denver. Thank you for connecting us. Thank you for making us meet one another. And let us hope that this is a collaboration that is long lasting. And today we will be working together to create new products and to keep on filling ourselves with the joy that we felt yesterday by finding like-minded people. On behalf of CSAN, on behalf of Graciela Martinez Arce, I sincerely thank you. Thank you, Aaron. Thank you, Juan. So Pamela.
Time. My Spanish, I understood everything you said, Juan Carlos, but I don't think I could do it myself in Spanish without a written speech in front of me. But it was wonderful to hear. And I've also had a long-standing collaboration with a fellow geoscientist at UNAM, so I'm very familiar already. But this is just exciting. It's the second day, I understand. I hope the first day went well. I just think that we really need to promote this type of research and creative work about cannabis. There's still so much stigma attached to it, even though it is becoming more and more mainstream, and we all know the medical benefits of this. And you know, this work is timely both for Mexico and for the United States. There was an article in the Denver Post this morning about marijuana as well. And I think that it just permeates so much of what we do and can really be included in a much more positive way in society than it has been in terms of our creative work, artistic work, and our scholarship, and even with health. And I just want to point out some of the things that we do already here at CLAS and at the University of Colorado, Denver. Marty, of course, we know he has his Maymester Cannabis Culture course. And then he had a course that he offered in 2019 that focused on workers' health and safety in the cannabis industry. There's also a cannabis chemistry course, and there's also a certificate in cannabis science and medicine that's included in the Anschutz School of Pharmacy. So it's all really very exciting, near and dear to my heart. I welcome this type of research. I hope you all have a wonderful conference. Thank you so much to the support of our colleagues from Mexico and from UNAM and to Juan Carlos, and please have a wonderful symposium. It's a gloomy day here in Denver. I don't know what it is like where you are, but hopefully the sun is shining, and we'll just pretend the sun is shining anyway in our virtual Zoom conference. So enjoy and welcome.
Thank you very much. Gracias, Pamela. Marty, go ahead.
Thank you.
Excellent. Good morning, everybody. I want to thank the Dean for joining us this morning. We appreciate your contribution. Also, Juan Carlos. And of course, I want to extend my thanks to the translators. My father's actually from Ecuador, but I don't speak Spanish. So without the translators, I'd be fumbling. So I really appreciate the labor that they're devoting to this project. So I really hope that each of you share this love for cannabis that I have for a research and creative process. Cannabis is one of these things that unites us. It also fractures us because we all are different and we have these different areas we live with different issues. But I see it as something that is a thread stitching together a quilt of all these incredible approaches to cannabis research and creative work. And in anthropology, it's understood that we study culture. And I think together we're creating cultures of destigmatization, cultures of counter narratives, and cultures of sort of liberation, of understanding cannabis as a process to understand who we are, the kinds of frameworks, whether regulatory or social or health, that could be recreated to ensure that this sector works better for more people. So I'm looking forward to educate myself about each of your work, and as well as the end result, a really profound and compelling set of publications that comes out of this work. So I'm looking forward to day number 2, and of course, day number 3. I hope each of you stick with us for day number 3, which is tomorrow. So thank you and welcome to day number 2.
Thank you, Marty. Gracias, Marty.
Thank you, Marty. So today's logistics, we are going to have a panel that is made up by very well-known personalities that are connected to the cannabis work. It is going to be in English. So for those attendees who haven't heard that because they've just joined the meeting, there are interpretation services available, simultaneous interpretation services. You can find them in the lower right corner of your screen. There's a globe icon. There you can select the language you need to follow. The second panel is going to be in Spanish. So once again, for the speakers who would like to listen to the English translation, you just need to select for that moment the English interpretation mode. At 11:40, we have programmed for us to finish with the presentations, and then we will have a Q&A for the general audience who are following us on YouTube, on Zoom. So if you have questions, write them down, or if we have enough time, we could perhaps open the mics, but we'll see. Marty, you have the use of the floor now, so you can introduce the participants of the first panel, the third panel, first of the day.
And I'm sorry, I want to make 2 points when possible before we begin, if that's okay. Okay, I definitely want to say thank you to the Dean's Office for contributions for the translations, as well as to CU Denver Office of Research Services for funding to help with the translations. And please, we're a global community, so each of you, could you put your name and your location and your institution where you're at in the chat? It'd be a great way to get to know each other. So thanks again, everybody.
So let me say this in Spanish. Por favor, pueden poner.
I'm going to repeat that in Spanish just in case. To all of the attendees, we ask you to write your name and the country you are visiting, or your email also, why not? So that we can create a directory so that you can receive the invitation for when we present the book. Go ahead, Marty, please.
Oh, those were the only comments I needed to make.
So ¿Quieres ya presentar a los
Could you
ponentes?
please now introduce the speakers of the first panel of the day?
You want me to introduce them? Okay, so this is a perfect example of me coming unprepared. So what I'm going to do is say that we have a spectacular panel of presenters coming up. I don't have their names in front of me or the titles of the presentations. So we're going to allow each of them a little time to give their name. And I want to apologize, but I'm going to recognize that this panel is probably going to be one of the best ones today.
Okay, so I can do that. So, Ru Johnson.
Ru Johnson.
Primos Hermanos Cannabis y la industria musical del autor del hip hop.
Ru Johnson is going to present.
La ponencia.
And afterwards we will listen to Osmera. And then we will listen to David with a presentation that is called Cannabis in Colorado. And then Mario Orteñez is going to be joining us with Transforming Cannabis, the Stigmatization of Workers, Marijuana Through Narratives. And finally, Scott Holman is going to present Chronic Dignified Freedom, Material and Exclusion. And finally, in the last session of the morning, will be by Liam Beran with the green leaf, the white background, the perspective of the cannabis books. And then we will have a break, as I have mentioned. So, sorry about this very abrupt introduction. Ru Johnson, could you please, you have 15 minutes.
Thank you. Good morning, buenos dias to everyone here today. Thank you so much to the organizers of the colloquium and most certainly for this opportunity to advocates and those who have a specific interest in the cannabis community. And I look forward to continuing to share my work as well as learning about all of your work as we prepare and create opportunities to impact the world and to sort of counter some of the stigma and the narratives that we've heard around cannabis. So thank you so much to Marty and Aaron for this opportunity. And I want to tell you a little bit about what I am working on and how I am hoping to present what is already a very interesting topic to the masses in a way that people will understand and enjoy and find to be a very important part of the conversation for how we change, how we talk about, think about cannabis and how we present what we do to the world. So my name is Ru Johnson, and my work in the music industry, I've been working in the music industry for the past, I would say at this point, maybe 15 years, creating platforms for independent artists to express themselves. So that means, you know, we produce shows and events, and we create marketing campaigns that spread the message of artists who have our values, our same value system. So people who want to make an impact on their community. I also live in Denver, and I noticed someone earlier mentioned that it is a gloomy day. We have very few of those, so it's kind of nice to have a little bit of rain in this beautiful city. And Denver has always been a very cool place, right? But right around the time that cannabis Amendment 64 passed and cannabis became legal, it just like blew up. So those of us who lived here in Colorado have already known that Denver has always been very cool and has always had a lot to offer culturally and creatively to our community. But with the legalization of recreational cannabis, we experienced an economic boom. And so that economic boom also spread its influence across the arts and advocacy, and particularly the music industry. So a lot of people consider Denver to be what they call a flyover city, meaning that artists were not necessarily touring through Denver. They would fly over Denver and you would have to see them in California or somewhere in Texas or something to that effect. But when cannabis became recreational legal here, it really changed the landscape and the economy of how artists were able to operate in the city because there was so much more cash, right? And so the idea of cannabis and music working together and working parallel to each other to create something amazing, that's not a new concept, right? But what is a new concept is the way we are seeing the money affiliated with cannabis affecting the community in a positive way, in ways that the music industry would not have been able to sustain itself first, right? And that what that does is make all the boats in the tide rise when it comes to arts advocacy and the resources and opportunities that are available. So when I think about how do we express to people that working in cannabis is a viable job and occupation, but also it pushes the culture forward by connecting musicians with their communities in a way that allows cannabis to be sort of the main ingredient in the recipe. And that is where First Cousins was born. So when people say like, okay, well, cannabis and music are like brother and sister, I always laugh and I say no, because there are things that you didn't do with your brother or sister, right? There are things that you adventured out and experienced that maybe your brother or sister or your sibling wasn't able not to necessarily show you. Those of us who have siblings, I see you kind of nodding your head, right? And that's because of sibling rivalry or just, you know, family dynamics. But when the First Cousins came around, when your first cousins arrived and they became a part of the environment of your nuclear family, there's a magic that takes place that can only happen with someone who's connected to you by blood, but not necessarily proximation. They're not necessarily close to you. So in proximity. So when I think about producing events and I think about working in the arts, it's interesting because I started to see that more people were smoking weed openly. Now, those of us who consume, it's not a big deal to think that you go to an outside festival and you smoke some herb, right? But I was noticing that so many more people who typically would not talk about their cannabis consumption, they were feeling more free, more open in these spaces where consumption was happening, but also where the music was happening. So what I found and what I continue to find is that the music opens up the cannabis space and allows for different kinds of people to come together in one space. You don't even have to smoke or even touch the plant to care about the fact that people enjoy this experience together. And then cannabis, of course, through, I think, education and knowledge and the way that we're able to talk about the importance of the plant, that destigmatizes and that creates a counter narrative in and of itself. But something about bringing cannabis and music together really, really creates this magic, and I think really helps us to overcome some of the barriers to entry or access that others might feel. So I want to read to you as a little excerpt from what I am going to be talking about in the anthology. So I will pull this up. And thank you so much to the translators for your time. Mi español es más o menos, so, you know, I'm grateful for you. If hip hop is the younger sibling to jazz music, cannabis is the first cousin that encouraged their creativity. Throughout the history of hip hop and its artful expression in tales of ghetto life, ever present in the timeline is the use of cannabis as a tool for creativity, swag, and as of late, a bargaining tool and currency. That's the economic piece I was talking about. Rap music and the cannabis industry overlap as both industries face a bit of a reckoning. Rap music because of the pandemic and the cannabis industry because of legalization, and as a result, destigmatization in the realm of professionalism. Economically, weed money poured into independent music communities who no longer needed the strong arm of massive corporations, many whose federal foundations don't allow them to openly encourage dealings in cannabis, for approval and access to art mediums and distribution. As the dollars poured in, the stigma decreased. In fact, Cities like Denver, Colorado, Washington, D.C., and others flourished with this open connection between music and cannabis. Festivals, celebrity appearances, white label deals with new cannabis brands and the like became the new normal. So much so that indie artists questioned exactly who was being served across the spectrum of cannabis and music collaborations. Historically, artists like Snoop Dogg, Cypress Hill, Redman and Method Man, Action Bronson, and others have touted their cannabis usage in unique and creative ways over hip hop production and through their rhymes. Once amendments like 64 in Denver and other initiatives passed, cannabis became a resource sought after as much as the artists themselves. Brands, dispensaries, and other stakeholders in the industry smartly hopped on the train of arts advocacy and music entertainment to create a stronger collaboration and through what Steve Stout calls the tanning of America. So I hope that what I will bring to the table is going to be a creative aspect and a creative perspective on advocacy in a way that allows us to see that cannabis is and can be used and within the professional realm while still maintaining the integrity that we need and want within the music community as well. And that also, I think, forces the conversation more between those who may feel that there is stigma, allowing them to see where that stigma comes, and for us to sort of counter that through these stories and understanding of how we all use it and how it connects to us in our everyday lives, like how we use music. Thank you so much. And thank you so much, Marty, for recognizing I have this weird time constraint this morning, but I will be back to listen to some of the others, and I can answer any questions that any of you have and also provide that document from which I was reading. So
Thank you a bunch, Ruth. If available, do you have any kind of web link that people want to learn more about you that you can put in the chat?
Yeah, I do. And as always, I am always working and reworking the website, but I will drop this in the chat for everyone. If you want to know more about kind of my writing work, this is where you can find some information there. And I will be back to answer any questions and to listen to some of the other great presenters as well.
I'm just amazed I haven't met you yet, Rua, here in Denver. And curious if you know my primos and the Montoyas, like Mestizo Park.
Actually, yeah, I'm sure that we cross paths for sure, because I am right by Curtis Park. So
yeah, they're my first cousins.
That's amazing. Okay, so I'll be back and we'll chat more and we'll connect. Thank you all so much. I really appreciate the time today.
Thanks for a
Thank
great
you.
presentation.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ru. Thank you. Russell, it's your time.
Morning.
Good morning. Glad
Nice to see you. Thank you so much for inviting me and having me on this morning. I'm Russell Bennett. I am a cannabis lawyer I live in Toronto, Canada. And to get this space today cleared for my family, I have 3 kids, 2, a 5 and a 9-year-old, and they're all on their iPads, and I'm like, I need the bandwidth, guys. You got to get out of the house. So they're in the backyard right now. So hopefully they won't trounce in on the meeting this morning. But I just wanted to I think I'm the only Canadian. Is that right? I'm the only Canadian here. Do you know that?
Probably.
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 Sweet. So I just want, it's very funny to me. I just wanted to,
Hey,
my son, what's that? My son and I, we built this puzzle. It's a 3D puzzle of the world last night. And he was like, so where are we, Dad? And I was like, okay, we're right here, North America. And I just wanted to point out, anybody that doesn't know where Toronto is, it's on top of one of the Great Lakes, the smallest one, Lake Ontario, right there. And it's interesting to me because I wanted to show this, share my screen with you, share my glow with you, because we are on one continent, all of us. And kudos to Aaron, to Marty for bringing us all together, because I would never have had the incredible opportunity to listen in on some amazing discussion and experiences yesterday from Mexico. I mean, up here in Canada, we don't get a lot of Mexican information, and there's a lot of U.S. information, but we don't get the kind of we get a lot of mixed information in Canada here. So, and we have our own brand of particular information that gets put across the waves. So I'm so honored to be a part of this tri-nation experience, and there are more of us here. It's not just me. Yes, there are more of us, but I'm the representative today. Anyway, so today I have less time than I thought, so I'm going to speed through it as much as I can. I'm also, as well as a cannabis lawyer, I am an author, and I'm just going to share my screen with you right now. Okay, can you see that? Okay, that's my website for
Yes.
my law firm, and it's called Cannabis Law. And it's a law firm dedicated to helping people who want to start their own cannabis businesses. That's me pre-pandemic, the nice do, and this is the book I wrote on the Cannabis Act in Canada. It's called Canada's Cannabis Act. It's a nice review, commentary, critique of the Canadian law and what is wrong with it. And there are many things wrong with it. I'm going to put all of the links. I've got a bunch of links to share with you this morning. I'm going to put them in the chat right now, so anybody that wants them can have them. Let's see. Well, I think I'll do that afterwards. Okay, I can't actually figure out how to do that now. Anyway, okay, so my discussion is not about me as a cannabis law, but at me before I became a cannabis lawyer. And I was, as soon as I became a lawyer, I decided that I had to make a documentary about a case that was happening when I graduated and became a lawyer. It was in 1997. And it followed the story of Christopher James Clay. And Chris Clay was one of these cases in the late 90s, mid to late 90s. This is an article from Cannabis Culture at the time, back in 1996. Chris Clay was this white boy from London, Ontario, about 2 hours west of Toronto, where he had started his own hemp store called Hemp Nation. It was the first hemp store in Canada, and he was one of 5 cases, as you can see here, that were in front of the courts. This particular case, though, caught my attention because there was a flyer I saw that said he's launching a constitutional challenge of the drug law, and Hemp Boy was his name. So I looked into it more, and there was a whole list of expert witnesses that were going to testify on his behalf. And this guy, Chris, had put together a website. Welcome to the Hemp Nation headquarters. This is, if you use Wayback Machine, you can go back in time and see this website. This was his website in 1996 or 1997, and it showed his constitutional challenge and what he was doing. He sold seeds for 2 years, cannabis seeds, to the public, and was not bothered by police at all until, of course, he got busted, and then suffered another bust when he started selling cannabis cuttings. Well, this case was taken up by law professor Alan Young, and it went all the way to the Supreme Court. It was joined by 2 other appellants at the Supreme Court, but the trial decision by Justice Clay, Justice McCart at the time. This is the decision, 1997. This judge, Justice McCart, was transformative for cannabis in Canada, and I think throughout the world, because what he did was demystify. He broke the stigma of cannabis in his judgment. If you scroll down to paragraph 20, where is it here? 20, 40, 30. I'm going to show you should have it right here. It is 25. Paragraph 25. This is the list of conclusions about marijuana in 1997. Now, this judge was 90. How old was he? He was 72 years old at the time. Incredibly rare for this to happen. He lists 13 myth-busting facts about marijuana. It is not harmful. It does not cause crime. It does not lead to brain dysfunction. It does not lead to heroin use. It is, you know, and the list goes on and on. So this was an incredible case. And I had the benefit of filming Chris and his family and the defense team. You can see the website page here, R versus Clay. This is the Wikipedia site on it. And unfortunately, when I pitched it to CBC, the Canadian Broadcasting Company here in Canada, they said, no, we don't care about cannabis. Weed is not on our top 10 list of things to discuss. So sadly, it was not meant to be until the Olympics were held that year, and Ross Rebliati, who was a Canadian snowboarder, snowboarding was the first time in 1998 that was an official sport. He won the gold medal, but then it was stripped away after he was tested positive for THC. Well, that created an incredible storm in the media, and CBC called me and said, no, actually, we want your documentary. So great. So I got to make the documentary, and it was an amazing turn of events. And so it was broadcast across the country. It was the best documentary of the year, the most watched, the most talked about, everything like that, and was nominated at the Hot Docs Festival the following year for Best Political Documentary. This is I put it on YouTube so everybody can see it. This is the professor and Christopher walking into the court, and it was shot on Betacam, if you can believe it, and we sent around copies of VHS to every member of Parliament so that they could see it. This is the I wanted to also use artwork to demyth mythology, the stoner culture. That this was an actual you know, a legitimate court case, because most people thought we were fringe. You know, anybody that was doing this was fringe. Anyway, the documentary is layered with his story, his parents' struggle, the court case, all the expert witnesses that testify, and I've punctured in chapters throughout with that 1936 movie, you know, Tell Your Children, this one. So where this kid that, you know, smokes a joint and then becomes an axe murderer by the end and kills his family and all the rest of it. Don't tell your children. So that was Stone. Am I out of time, by the way? I've got 2 minutes left. This is terrible. It's not enough time, Marty. I don't know. We need more time.
Okay, 5 minutes more. Go ahead.
You're crushing me. I haven't even got to Reefer Man. Okay, anyway. So Chris ended up getting he didn't go to jail. His record, his scientific record that he and Alan Young laid down formed the base of legalization that we have today. That was all the expert witnesses from all across North America, many from the States, by the way, that came in and testified in Toronto, in London for his benefit. Chris now operates Hemp Nation, which is an online store because of the ridiculous pandemic we're under. And he also operates, he's trying to get a license for Warmland Cannabis. I did want to say something about you know, the destigmatization of that film, but I'm gonna shift it over to my next project, which was Reefer Man. Now, Reefer Man, what came out of my frustration that the government hadn't listened to me yet, and so I was like, okay, look, how am I going to take the stigma out of and make it an engaging piece of art. So I thought, okay, I need to be an actor and I need to figure this out. So I went to acting school for a couple of years, came back to Toronto, worked in the industry, and decided, okay, I need to do a one-man show. That resulted in the Reefer Man. It was a show about a lawyer taken from my own life who grew award-winning cannabis in his basement, which I actually did not do, but I've always dreamed of doing, and I will do one day. But anyway, the Reefer Man was a superhero story. It was a coming of age story. It was a story to bust the myths about marijuana and make the lead character a lawyer, a white lawyer, never seen before in the cannabis landscape of film or theater. And I wanted to tell it in a funny way, in an engaging way, not in a polemic way. And that was this thing that my wife and I struggled with. She wasn't my wife back then. We were boyfriend, girlfriend, another story, not enough time to talk about it. But anyway, we fell in love over telling this story. And I toured it across the country, Canada, with 8 shows across the country to great success. The Reefer Man got so many great reviews. This is a poster from back in the day when it became a legit show. We won all kinds of awards. I put the marketing efforts were legendary. I mean, I got on the cover of newspapers, to the lawyer running out of the courthouse with the weed plant. That was an enduring image. And it started, the play started with Cab Calloway's
With the chest there.
Reefer Man.
Reefer? Yeah, man. Mean a chest high, failing.
And then so he was, yeah, that's your brain on drugs. So anyway, okay, so flash forward to so there's Stoned, there's Reefer Man, and there's some of the news articles, and then yes, the final play was held at a professional version of it was held in Vancouver. So the key issue for me for this play and for the documentary was how to make art that is engaging, that is not standing up on your soapbox and ranting, because people are turned off immediately. How do you suck people in and create empathy? And so that was a very essential part of creating art that would bust the myths. To conclude, currently, I realized that both of my projects were about white guys. So right now, I'm working on a documentary series that will show all kinds of stories with all kinds of faces and all kinds of people who are successful in the cannabis industry and who are not, who are in the licensed industry and who are not. And that schism, that bifurcation has happened in Canada because of the law, and it was an intended effort by the government to create a two-tiered system of we have the licenses and we're legit, and you're never going to get the licenses and you're not legit, and to crush them with this strong criminal arm of the law. So that's what my current project is now, and I look forward to listening to everybody else, and thank you so much for your time.
Thank you very much, Russell. Danny, go ahead.
Muy encantada. Me gusta mucho a escuchar la que como
I
terminaron.
love to hear what you said about the system, what you said at the end. It's a system of white superiority, the same as in the US. My name is Daniel Stange. I'm from Jaramillo. I'm mixed race. A part of my family is indigenous, and we don't say we crossed the border. We say the border crossed into our land, right? Because my great grandparents were from the Apache and Comanche tribes, but my grandparents speak Spanish, and since I was very young, I was involved in the culture because of my mom. I remember she showed me the Cheech and Chong movie. I was about 7. And my parents were growing weed in Boulder, Colorado when I was very young. So I grew up in Colorado, and I didn't get a very negative perspective of marijuana. When I was 14 at school, they caught me with some weed and the police came and they arrested me. And that's when I realized that society had a very different understanding of marijuana. And I studied a little bit about how marijuana had some precedents and how it was consumed before, and how recreational consumption started really strongly with the jazz movement, especially with Louis Armstrong. He played the trumpet and he smoked a lot. And during his time, the laws were very strict against cannabis. And he said, if you're not going to give me permission to smoke weed, I'm not going to play this instrument ever again. And very quickly, he got a permit because obviously the business owners of the music venues, well, they have some influence and they can affect some of the rules. And when I was young, I was involved. I sold weed, and on September 11th, after September 11 in New York, a lot of dealers from Mexico who would bring me stuff from the border had a lot of problems coming in. So I thought they shouldn't be the ones taking all the risk. So I went there many times until I had a problem on Juarez, where it was a very weird experience. But I got to connect with the culture, and I also did Aztec dancing in 1993. And in my heart, I always had this passion for dancing and for music. And I think that marijuana has a lot to do with this. And so I got involved with this Aztec dancing. Right now, I know some people from Mexico City who are living in California, but they say, no, no, nobody knows we're from Mexico because they're part of some tribes from Canada. And, I just say this because Russell, he said he felt very alone being the only Canadian. But anyway, my experience gave me the opportunity of really going in deep into this and hearing a lot of stories. When I was in Juarez in El Cerezo, I tried to research the rituals from my ancestors. And the Spanish brought the cannabis plant here because it comes from India. So it's sad to see here that there's not a lot of people from the Hindu culture or anybody from India. They should be more involved. And the system, a lot of it is in the hands of a lot of white people. They have a lot more influence here. But then after some time, I came back to Denver, Colorado, and I saw that my cousins and a lot of people here, I can no longer sell in 64. So I had to find another another way to support my family. And that's where I started with a nonprofit. And this nonprofit it's a non-government organization that seeks the support of the Latino community and everybody who is oppressed by the economic system, by systemic racism. So with them, I was able to develop more and learn more about my culture and really connect with the members of the community. Our culture is not very well represented in education. And after a lot of time there and getting to know more people there, I I gained a position in the board of directors of my school, the same school where I was arrested for marijuana possession. Now I am in a position to make decisions about the curriculum in the school. And we have a certain percentage of students, about 80% of students are Latino or they have Hispanic heritage. And out of that 80%, 60% speak Spanish. So my agency works very closely with the parents, the fathers and the mothers in Spanish, and they're building a network so that they can fight for their rights and they can stand up for the health of their community and getting more involved in general. So we are starting programs in the school. It has land where we are planting gardens and we are going to start to grow things. And with the nonprofit, we're working on urban agriculture and we're trying to get healthier food. One of the camps, they bring mushrooms, microgreens, different kinds of lettuce, healthy things. But they also have a part of their land where they're growing hemp weed. They're they're not thinking about consumption. They're using it for other things, other kinds of products. And I talked about my story. I mentioned how I came back to Colorado and my cousins and a couple of childhood friends, they have their own stores now. And for example, my cousin, he used to have a business, Mr. Tiki's. The logo is a fox smoking. It was on the main street. And, he was fine making some money. And soon after, his neighbor opened the Mahai dispensary. My cousin was like, no, what the hell? I was here before. What? Isn't there a rule that they can't be here? Isn't it supposed to be like 1,000 feet away or something? But before he had the opportunity to talk to the owners, he got a letter from the city saying, Mr. Torres, sorry, but you gotta leave. And he was really confused. The Mahai Dispensary Agency has the license from the state saying that they are older than your business. So they're next to you and they're enforcing the law so that you have to get out. And my cousin tried to set up shop elsewhere. He had some problems. He had some legal problems. Right now, I have a brother living in California. He works for a company which is the largest marijuana production company in California. And he says that they control over 50% of all marijuana in California. So the economy is starting to be in the hands of very few people, which this is very sad to see. And I mean, I'm grateful for opportunities like this one to share and to talk about this and work. I've known Marty for over 10 years, and we've never smoked together, actually. We worked on a lot of programs. I'm happy that you invited me. You had an event about anthropology and cannabis in Colorado, and I invited my dance group, and we did a ceremony to start the event. And so, even though that's not a plant from our ancient culture in this continent, it's still part of our connection to nature, and it's valid, and we are capable of doing this with our attitudes and our capabilities and our skills. And the word marijuana comes from the Mexican influence because before it used to be called just cannabis. Americans wouldn't call it marijuana until after the Mexican American War and the whole thing with the border, and it ended up where it is today. And with the truce in Guadalupe Hidalgo, all land in Texas, New Mexico, Arizona used to belong to Mexican people. And in few years, in just a few generations, the land was stolen and the people there were turned away and the white people took over the land. So a lot of families in Mexico had to find another way to live, and cannabis was the way to do that. So then some songs came out like the cucaracha, the cockroach, a traditional song. Lila Downs has a cover version of it. It's really great. she tries to get involved because she has some revolutionary influence coming from that time. And the culture was changing at the time. And since the 30s, they were singing about that, like marijuana boogie. There are pachuco songs, like the word pachuco itself. It comes from LA because the Chicanos, the Mexicans there, would work selling weed. They would travel to El Paso to bring the weed. In El Paso, they're called chuco. So they say you're going to Chuco, or in Spanish, Pachuco. You're going there. So that's how the nickname got started. The Mexican Chicanos in California who would go to Chuco, and they had their zoot suits, their whole aesthetic. So, the culture is very much involved and very has a lot of influence from use of cannabis. So it plays a very important role. It's a medicine. When the Mexican army caught me at Puerto Palomas and they pointed their guns at me and said, we found your drugs. I said, these aren't drugs, this is a medicine. Because in the US, they want war on the Chicanos a lot of the time because, they want to attack the white invaders. So the Chicanos want war, right? They want to recover their land, and marijuana is a medicine to calm them down, to chill and find more peaceful ways of dealing with this, more harmonious ways to influence the culture and change the system, really change the economic system, the legal system, etc., so that we can all live in harmony. And I think there are, I mean, regardless of where your ancestors are from, there used to be an original culture where people would live with the land. There was a spiritual experience that you would experience in your physical life instead of thinking that you are just a physical being searching for spirituality. It was a part of you. In reality, we are spiritual. We are having an experience, a physical experience between life and death, but we're here forever, and we have this feeling that nature is part of us, it's part of our lives. So when the environment is suffering, when the industries are damaging nature, it makes us feel that something is wrong. So sometimes we use marijuana to ease that pain, but also to motivate us because it gives us creativity in music. When I'm smoking, I cannot put my guitar down. I'm just playing all day. And this is something that helps us with our vibrations, with our energies. And we need to vibrate with a collaborative energy, an energy of cooperation instead of conflict, because conflict is a made up human thing. It's a way to fight nature, and to think that all animals are just engaged in a struggle for killing and survival. But really, animals live in harmony. All the plants exist in harmony. And, mushrooms who live below the earth and everything. So our essence is to be here to connect, to be here to collaborate, because we are a single race. Human beings are a single race. Yeah, we have a lot of different expressions, but we are a single race. And I think the weed culture helps us connect. I don't know if my time is up. I feel like I just concluded. Thank you so much, Daniel, for your participation. Now Marty has the floor. Thank you.
Excellent, thank you. And I got from Danny's presentation a date to consume some cannabis, so I'm going to take you up on that. And I hope all of us as a group can do that collectively one day for recreational and research purposes. So what I'm going to do is share my screen. I have a PowerPoint that I'm hoping will be useful to guide and provide some structure with the work I'm going to be talking about in the chapter. So let me know if there's any problems with people seeing the PowerPoint. So I believe it's up now, that's correct?
Yes, Marty.
Okay, so what I'm going to share with you is my vision of my chapter, and it's a work in progress. The actual essence, the soul of the presentation and the chapter is not done yet because just me being overscheduled, but the key point is you're going to see the context and the structure of my chapter. And again, it's a work in progress and I'm hoping to get some input. So this opening slide is really just a little bit more about me. When I did my dissertation in Southern California, I actually spent 3 years while being a graduate student as a full-time labor organizer. And so this is important to me because the labor organizing experiences shaped my approach to academic and creative work. Essentially, I'm interested more broadly to understand how workers assert their rights as workers and collectively begin and obtain goals such as collective bargaining rights or trade unions. So that is sort of at the basis of the approach I'm taking to this project. And in the upper left corner there is a logo from my current university juxtaposed with the marijuana leaves, because I want to ensure that for me and others, higher education to me is synonymous with cannabis research and creative work. And this picture, by the way, it's a little bit dated. It's about 20, 25 years ago. So it was during my younger days. So I'm going to shift to slide number 2. So my approach, and I kind of said this earlier this morning, my approach is to make the sector work better for more people. And I have a number of concepts that guide my thinking, and they're guiding how I'm framing the chapter. The first one is this idea of counter narratives. In the next slide, I actually go into a definition of it that can give us something to think about or to repurpose in a way that's useful for our work, or at least my chapter. So another created by a Vietnamese scholar and an author who uses this in his writing. It's a notion that says there's a lot of stories out there, a lot of good stories, but there's not a lot of stories about non-dominant cultural members, especially in the cannabis sector. So we need plenty more stories from these people in the trenches. And this is embodied in this notion of narrative plentitude. So it's another term that guides the work I'm doing. Additionally, a concept I use is a transnational cannabis capitalist class. So for me to understand the sector and to understand the individuals who devote their labor to the production of cannabis, I'm interested in understanding that these people have power, and I look at them as a transnational class of capitalist cannabis folks. So that'll be a term I also elaborate in the chapter. And then also this notion of power. It's an anthropologist named Eric Wolf uses the notion of power specifically to understand how people experience power. Like, what does it feel like? And so I use this notion, I apply it to worker-focused research on cannabis research and creative work. And then lastly, this notion of thick solidarity. Solidarity, we understand what that is. Thick solidarity is more maybe radical direct action, explicit support and contributions and collaboration with people in the trenches. So thick solidarity is much more than cosmetic solidarity, or for example, simply just clicking a button on the internet to say you support excuse me, one cause or another. So again, these are just a bunch of terms that I'm going to be using and developing further. Specifically for our case in the book, the set of 2 books, as well as my chapter, the notion of counter narrative. There's a scholar from Canada who's written about indigenous food systems. Her name is Leslie Dawson. So I use her definition as a way to as a launching pad to understand what a counter narrative is. And so I'll read it for you slowly. as a dominant narrative can outline a widely accepted belief as truth, a counter narrative can dispute the belief of the dominant narrative and create space for non-dominant community members to make their voices heard. And I think to add to that, to make voices heard with influence, that could influence policy, that could influence regulatory frameworks, that could influence workplace protections. So in my case, or my chapter, I'm going to argue that to reduce cannabis stigmatization and increase fairness and accountability in the legal cannabis sector, workers-centered counter narratives as a form of resistance to corporate cannabis must be developed and circulated. So I'm going to examine specifically the stigmatization of cannabis workers in a setting where corporate cannabis companies, they promote notions of social equity and policies of social equity, but they exclude pro-worker and pro-labor union practices. And then the bottom sentence here, as a form of resistance to the corporate narrative of social equity, a new narrative must be created that positions cannabis workers as central to destigmatize cannabis and promote worker rights and labor unions. So these are sort of some of the things that are guiding my thinking. More broadly, here's the context of cannabis from the perspective of Colorado and the United States and globally. In the next two slides, I talk about this context. This context is important because for me, at the end of the day, a worker who devotes his or her labor to the production of cannabis should be fairly compensated. And at the moment, that's not the case. And they're stigmatized because of their job. And so this is just to show how huge along economic and financial lines this sector is and it's becoming. I'm not going to read all the bullet points, but the bottom line here is that, for example, the first line, $2.2 billion in cannabis sales in Colorado occurred in 2020. That is a massive amount of money. And then the bottom bullet point here, in a few years, by 2030, our market in the United States is projected to be worth over $75 billion. So again, this is just a bunch of numbers to demonstrate the magnitude of money that's being circulated by this sector. And then of course, my main interest is, are workers fairly getting compensated, and what can we do to understand stigma among the workforce and how we can produce counter narratives or examine emerging counter narratives from a worker perspective. Now, the COVID-19 and cannabis issue is really important to mention because momentum has been built up that has generated the destigmatization and normalization of cannabis. And here's a few points that emphasize this issue. So during the pandemic in the United States, and I'm unfamiliar with Mexico, and I'd like to learn and educate myself if cannabis has been considered an essential business. I presume not because of the legal issues, but in the United States, most states where cannabis is legal has designated cannabis as an essential business. So again, that's part of this momentum of destigmatizing and normalizing the sector. Bullet point number 2, there's an economist and a lawyer here in Denver. He said that cannabis consumers are looking at cannabis as a staple commodity in their lives. So again, more and more normalization, and that this sector, this commodity is becoming a part of our everyday culture. So Americans purchased $18 billion worth of cannabis in 2020, and the pandemic probably facilitated this because isolation, people had more time for recreational purposes and medicinal purposes, and this was an increase of purchases of 71% over 2019. And I think the bottom point here, the emphasis is during the post-pandemic, the COVID-19 era, we're going to see a new climate for garnering or promoting, supporting mainstream support for cannabis commercialization. So the question is, what are the implications for the process of destigmatizing cannabis generally, and of course, destigmatizing cannabis work? So the next couple slides deal with my past and existing research, which will be the focus of my chapter, the data, if you will. So in an earlier study, I did a survey and interviews with 19 cannabis workers in Colorado about their experiences. And some of the main things that pop out, cannabis workers were concerned about exposure to mold and powdery mildew. So in other words, they would go to work, work on the plant, trim it, process it, and then come home harmed along health lines because of respiratory issues due to mold and powdery mildew. And typically these are caused by moisture or indoor facilities where the cannabis product is cultivated. And then also workers felt they didn't feel they were paid fairly, they had little benefits, they have a hostile work environment where if they tried to create a union, they would become targeted and discriminated against by the employer, and sometimes even fired. Now that was my past study that has guided my current work. In fall of 2020, during the pandemic, I conducted a survey online with 213 cannabis workers in Colorado. Each person got a $25 gift card. They videotaped interviews. Some of the topics were demographics, benefits, health and safety, worker rights. The main thing why I'm sharing this is there's a reoccurring theme in the interview responses of stigmatization of cannabis jobs. So the focus of my chapter is going to elaborate on workers' statements and their views about working in a job that is stigmatized and affects their ability, for example, to get auto loans, or just affects their ability potentially to get future work. So my chapter is going to elaborate more fully on the findings from my interviews and survey responses about stigmatization of the cannabis jobs. So the last few slides, I'm going to just talk about the larger context, which I guess I would say put pressure and create a landscape where the stigma of cannabis generally, but also about cannabis workers is facilitated. The stigma is perpetuated because of this larger context. So the first thing is, I mentioned earlier, social equity. In the United States, we have this momentum to ensure that people of color, so African Americans, Latinos, and others can access the market. And so there's really good programs designed to ensure that individuals who've been victims of the war on drugs can access the legal market. So they call this a social equity scheme. And in principle, I agree with them. But the backstory is cannabis companies are happy to spend money, happy to devote public relations programs to share how much they're spending in supporting equity programs, but they won't pay their workers a living wage, or they won't stop obstructing a worker's right to organize. So the social equity issues for me are important. They're useful to bring equality in the sector, but they have limitations. And the limitations is that the cannabis corporations that support these equity schemes, they refuse to pay better wages or to treat their workers with dignity and let them assert their rights as workers. So the other thing is CSR. I won't go too much into that, but these are corporate social responsibility schemes where companies present themselves as contributing to community development and doing things like planting trees, but in their own company workplaces, they won't pay better wages, and they won't, again, recognize workers' rights to unionize. So there's limitations of presenting a corporation as a responsible citizen, and then the practices that demonstrate they're actually harming or obstructing workers' rights. And then these are some massive companies. We call them multi-state operators. And the problem is these are some of the companies that promote social equity, but also some of the companies through lobbying organizations that obstruct pro-worker legislation. And so this is the multi-state operator kind of group of companies. These are the top 10 that, for me, I want to understand further in the role they play in stigmatization of cannabis workers and what they do to obstruct workers in terms of their rights. A little bit more about social equity, but I'll skip that. So my recommendation is a development and circulation of worker-focused counter narratives as an antidote to corporate cannabis dominant narratives that obstruct worker rights and labor unions. Now, I'm going to end on something totally different because I think it's a new path forward that might be a natural next step in my work in cannabis, and I want to promote maybe some discussion. There's this idea that non-humans have like a consciousness or have an ability to express themselves. And this is embodied in this idea of multi-species ethnography of cannabis. So in other words, cannabis as a plant has a mind of its own, and its lives are caught up in complex relations with humans, politics, economics, and culture. So I'm curious to explore along theoretical lines, arts-based lines, what is the plant? What is this female powerhouse of, this agricultural crop? What is it saying about these following things? What is cannabis as a plant saying about stigmatization? What is it saying about the chemicals needed to produce low-cost, mediocre weed, which is what I describe what comes out of the larger companies that are more interested in profit and not necessarily integrity of this special plant. What is this plant saying about the suppression of wages? And then what is it saying about the consolidation of companies, which means small owned mom and pop companies like Danny mentioned earlier? What is it saying about the consolidation of the weed industry, and what are the implications for stigmatization generally, and then of course the stigmatization of workers themselves? So with that, I'm going to end. And again, I appreciate your attention, and I'm looking forward to some dialogue.
Thank
Unmute this. Hello. So I guess I'm on. Do I click this or how do I see? I'm on. Okay. I don't know how to see what's going on the screen. Do I need to click something? Thank you. So speaker, still not showing me. Ah, no, not showing you. How do I see me? Yes, I do. Yeah. No, I don't want to do that. Okay, let me start. I can, but the thing is, I can't see what I'm doing. That's the problem. Uh, okay, you can see me, but I can't see. I need to see what I'm showing you because otherwise I can't. I'm going to use things props to show you.
You can
Oh my God.
click on presenter's view.
Okay, thank you. Where is that?
The top right corner. It should say speaker view.
Speaker. Okay, I did it. I clicked speaker view and it doesn't. I can't see me. Oh boy. Oh boy. Well, okay, you guys are just gonna have to tell me when you can't see stuff. Uh, there's no blackboard, but that's all right. I'll go for it, okay? Because I'm gonna hold things up, and I'm not gonna be able to see what what's there. So, oh wait, can you still see me?
Yes.
Okay, so I'm using it. I'm using a different screen then, where I actually have a thing open. All right, sorry about the technical delay. That'll work. So first, hello everybody, and thank you, Aaron and Marty, for organizing this event, and thank you to the National Autonomous University of Mexico and CSUN. This is amazing. It's really fascinating, and I I mean, I'm caught up in these recent presentations, and I have to resist responding, so I will. And I'll go to yesterday. Yesterday, in opening remarks, the CSUN director, Graciela Martinez Zalce, she read from a text that described a drug deal. And she contrasted the intimacy. She contrasted the intimacy of a drug deal with buying legal weed that had become another commodity that had entered the capitalist economy. And actually, that's what everybody is talking about. They're talking about everything they're talking about is what happens when weed moves it becomes a commodity under capitalism. That's the problem, right? For all, and what this intimacy that she described, the drug deal intimacy, that's made possible and intensified and even encouraged. It's encouraged by the exclusive nature of a drug deal. What is excluded, that is, the police are hopefully excluded. Others who might, you don't want other people to know about it. It's exclusive, it's closed. So this closed, intimate space is central to what I'm going to talk about today. Okay, so my work on cannabis stigma included making a series of artist books, and these are 3 of a series of 5. You can see here in the background. This is actually a book, not a blackboard. Danielle, Danny, I'll open it later. And there's another one, and there's one inside this box. Okay, my work on these books in interviews with outlaw growers in the Humboldt County region of Northern California. My access into this area began in the late 1980s when I was hired by grower environmentalists to produce a film. In that same period, I worked in illegal growing and got to know people. What I'm going to describe today is what I learned using art to dignify the lives of outlaw growers. For instance, the importance of reaching those who were most hostile to this kind of work, people who felt most threatened by it. And about the importance of making sure that even work that is that's by its nature exclusive can reach a lot of people somehow. And I believe these lessons should apply widely in working against stigma affecting other kinds of illegal drug workers and producers. And this is interesting because what Marty is talking about, he's talking about workers in cannabis post-legalization. So they're really workers like any other worker in the capitalist economy. And what I'm talking about here very specifically are workers who are working in illegal economies. And they have different social relations both to the state, but that's a separate issue. But I'm not talking about user stigma. I'm talking about dealer, drug producer, and grower stigma. So as is well known, cannabis stigma in North America is rooted in racism and schemes of racialized political domination. But what is not well known, if it's known at all, is how other kinds of stigma emerged within largely white, pro-cannabis grower communities. Communities that were founded in the early 1970s by back to the land hippies who called cannabis the sacred herb. Good for raising spiritual and political awareness and consciousness. Yet in weed country, to only grow weed or to only deal became a subject of serious disapproval, where you could hear somebody talk about little Joey, who he thought might grow up to be a good member of the community, who instead turns out to be nothing more than a grower. And I have an analog prop to demonstrate this, to show you. So this is why I needed to see it. See now, Daniel. So, and it's mirrored for me. So this is to give you an idea of what, a general idea of grower stigmatization in Northern California. So you have it from the outsider stigmatization as violent gangsters, which no one actually involved in growing would really believe, all the way to this very inside stigma, which is, oh, a person is only a grower, or the concept of the potstitute. And then there's a place where these intersect. One reason only growing could be stigmatized in an economy completely dependent upon growing was that certain hippie ethics came to dominate grower community public culture. For instance, illegal weed business could be morally acceptable for supporting a homestead, going back to the land, or to support political activism or art, or your kid's education, or maybe an eco-friendly tropical winter vacation. A cluster of violent deaths among adult male children of hippie growers in the mid-2000s triggered a moral panic that you could hear broadcast on the local grower-founded and grower-funded radio station. Listeners called to grieve and to lament the failure of hippie ideals. They blamed, above all, they blamed marijuana growing as a business instead of for the sacred herb to share, not for profit. I decided to make this series of Chronic Freedom books for exclusive exhibition among growers and grower communities, in part to counter this increased self-stigmatization, what flared up over these men's deaths, but more really to affirm their lives and the lives of their peers who were still living, by uniting their histories and the histories of their parents in this work. I'm going to show you some pictures of, instead of sharing a screen, I'm going to show it to you like this. So here are a few of the locations where where I did these private presentations.
They look great on screen, by the way.
They do?
Yeah, they
You
look
can see
great.
it okay?
Yep.
That's great. You see, this is more fun, right, than sharing screen? I'm sharing a screen. I'm sharing a screen, like with my body. Okay. Here's another one. So it's very different. So this grower is very like a suburban house with a swimming pool. Nobody wanted to be in a picture, but it's still a part of that growing world. It's another location. Some of these private settings were like private community spaces, like this one. This was a private house. So that gives you a little idea. You can kind of picture the closed environments. So why? All of these events were organized by the hosts, and the invitations were exclusively run by the host with my requirement that no press, no journalists could be present to cover the events, even the pro-grower, pro-cannabis people, because I'll tell you why. So why this kind of exclusion? Because by restricting participants to people who knew each other, or who were definitely inside this world in all of its dimensions, I wanted to heighten this intimacy, the kind of intimacy between a drug dealer and their customer, to allow these people to discover their own community exclusive content, their stories, content that included objects like annotated paper bags used in bud processing, homestead materials, where everything is unexplained. I'm going to show you one object. This is kind of going off script quickly, because I think it may not look like much, but like this is an example. So you see this object on the page? Can you see it? Oh, there. Now you can see it. See that? There you see it. Right? So that's an example of many different things that appear in the book. There's no caption. There's nowhere in the book where that object is explained. There are normal exposition. There's normal reporting, other writing that I do in it, but nowhere where I write do I explain anything that somebody who is in that world wouldn't already know. So the reason for this, again, the reason for all of this is to create an environment, and in these settings was to create an environment where everything demands shared knowledge, inside knowledge and understanding, all presented in settings that deliberately excluded anyone who could represent the pressure from outside questions or assumptions to perform, to push them into explanations or performances. Okay, so you're growers, you must be gangsters, or you must be, or you have something to explain. You have to. So the point was to remove that pressure and to exclude any outsider narrative tropes. Ideally, the assembled initiates become free to share the unspoken knowledges and feelings that would make possible, and I observed it happened, would make possible this kind of heightened experience of exaltation. It's like a magic sparks where the people come together and they discover objects and things from their world as in this illegal weed economy and its cultures. So what is exclusive about the books? I'll give you an idea. First, the main volume is heavy. This book, and it's made with kind of exclusive materials. This is wood cut from the area of oak panels in the style of a medieval Bible, except instead of linen cords, the cords are irrigation lines for watering the plants. And it includes inside, there are actual bullets that correspond to the bullets that killed 3 of the young men whose deaths triggered the moral panic I referred to earlier. My idea with this book was that you have to go to it. And that was intentional. It also included interviews that were part of what I was trying to use to create this exclusive environment. And these interviews, can you see? You can see how there's some blacked out areas.
Yeah, we can see.
In some areas you can see. So I prepared those pages and gave them to the interview subject, and they could remove what they didn't want in it. Despite that process, there were names left in that some other people heard about their names being in this book and other people's interviews that made them freak out, and actually they conveyed threats of violence against me and legal action to stop the book. So this sensitive content, I was trying to build out content that would create this kind of exclusive, intimate experience, but the more private and the more intensely exclusive the material, the more likely somebody was going to get pissed off. But this is, so I'm giving you an idea. So getting to the edge, actually, what I want to say is a lesson learned here was my fuck up was that I did not part of my process was to just, anybody who didn't want to be a part of it, I would just say, okay, I don't want anybody who doesn't want to be a part of it to be a part of it. But that was a mistake, because when these guys got pissed off, I should have gone to them. I should have pleaded with them to understand the project, because they remained, even if I took their names out. Their names never appeared in the book as it were, even in these private settings. But that was a mistake. So I would say this is one of the lessons from this. If anybody was going to use art in this way, it's absolutely essential to make really a great effort to reach everybody involved, because just one cell of opposition like that can do a lot of damage to the project. Okay, how am I doing on time? A few minutes. Okay. All right, then I'm going to wrap up. If it's a few minutes, I'm just going to go straight to, I'm going to skip the rest then. No, I won't. I'm going to do one more part, which is to talk about the light book. The light book is an example, another example of a book that was made to be difficult. And it's difficult in ways that also make it dangerous. You can see, you can cut yourself on it, on these edges. These are broken out light bulbs, 1,000-watt high pressure sodium, mercury sodium light bulbs that are used in growing. Everything in this book is involved in growing indoor weed. The mylar backing, this is a turkey bag used for storage and transport. This book provoked one woman, an older woman, to tears when she discovered, she saw it installed. She goes up to this object, she looks at the pages, she realized what it is, and she started crying because she encountered elements of her work life, how she made a living, turned into art. And she was just blown away. She couldn't say why. She had to have one. She wanted to put it in her small grow room. I mean, for like at least 20 years, she had lived from a small room growing weed, and she wanted this book. She wanted this art representation, art reflection of her life, this dignification of her everyday life, her hidden secret, shameful. Like, her relatives can't know that her hippie life led to her having a room that she lives off of, right? So she wanted the book, but couldn't have it because it's too precious, it's too expensive, it's too difficult. And that's another lesson. I made objects, so at this thing, it succeeded as art. What made it succeed as art made it fail as activist art. And that's another kind of lesson. I wanted to show you the bullet niches, but I'm going to skip it because we're out of time. Thank you. So my conclusions. Exclusive and expensive art can work against illegal drug life stigma. Okay, I guess I don't need to read it to you, do I? It's short. I salute you all involved in this. And I look forward to what follows.
Go ahead with your presentation, and then we will have a period of questions from the public.
Hi there, can everyone hear me okay?
Yes.
Great,
Yes.
Perfect. My name is Leah Berman. I will be graduating actually next week from an applied anthropology program at the University of South Florida. My dissertation was on the role of bud tenders in the cannabis community. I was a bud tender myself in the early years of cannabis legalization here in Colorado. And then I recently went back to continue research on bud tenders in the past couple of years. So it was really, I know that Marty told me that a lot of this is about storytelling. So I'll try and add in a couple of stories here and there, but I was coming from a very elite master's program, and I came back in Europe, and I came back to Colorado, and I needed a job to kind of fill my time until I went back to school. And so this was in early 2013 when cannabis started being legalized here in Colorado. And I was always a cannabis consumer growing up here. Again, I know a lot of us talk about it is maybe part of a more accepted part of our culture here in Colorado, perhaps than other states in America. So I grew up in a cannabis almost friendly, I would say, environment. So going back into the industry, there was definitely a clash of cultures there. I was very surprised, again, coming from a tight-knit, rule-following, heavy research kind of environment, going into being thrown into a medical dispensary where there really was not a lot of, even though it's talked about that there's a lot of rules and regulations, there really weren't any at that time. And we were really making up the job of bud tender as we went. And I talk a lot about this in my dissertation about this idea of bud tender, right? Where does this come from? What does this mean? Are bud tenders really a take on bartender? Are they a take on a pharmaceutical representative? What are they really? And does their actions match their title? That's explained about in my dissertation, but I interviewed 33 bud tenders. And during this process, like many students, I kind of bit off a lot more than I could chew. So one of the things that I did was that I collected print media everywhere I went. Every time I went to a dispensary, I would collect something. Every time I would go to the post office, here in Colorado, they have these like free magazine hubs in front of post offices or Walmarts where you can grab free magazines. And usually, which is quite funny, is they are always cannabis magazines, cannabis print materials. So it was awesome for me because every time I would go to the grocery store or the post office, especially, I would grab a magazine. And I wanted to do a lot of stuff about this. What are these advertisements trying to tell us, right? I think coming from this idea of imagined communities from Benedict Anderson, like we all imagine ourselves to be a kind of cannabis consumer. So I wanted to see through print media and advertisements, what kind of stereotypes or typologies of cannabis consumers were being presented in print media. I never actually ended up going into that because my dissertation was, I think, like 10,000 words over the limit. So I had to actually cut out a lot of stuff, but during my defense, I just kind of made an offhand comment because when I was doing research, I felt like I was almost stuck in my own kind of hell. And I'll tell you why. I would have a source and I'd go, oh my God, that's a great source. Where did I find that? Let me go back to my pile, right? Because when you're doing a dissertation, your house is full of books and articles and your family is mad at you, you're messy, the whole thing. So I would say, where is that book? And I'd say, was it this book? Oh, can you not see it? Oh no, I'm gonna have to take off my virtual background here for a second. Hold on, sorry, because it's not showing.
Or if you just hold it in front of your face, it should be fine.
Oh, okay.
Closer to the camera.
Oh no.
Oh, maybe not. Sorry about that.
Yeah, hold on. Let me just take off my virtual background. Because this is kind of like the previous, this is kind of, oh, that's for another class. Delete. These are all for my teaching classes, sorry. I don't know how to get rid of any of these. You guys, this is crazy.
Just get a screenshot and put it in the chat if you want.
Okay, well, hold on. Let me share my, I have actually a backup. So hold on. I'm gonna share my screen to here, which is my presentation. But I couldn't tell because look at all of these cannabis covers, right? Does anyone notice anything special about them? They are all white covers, right? With a green leaf on them. So it made it very difficult to figure out which source was coming from which book. On top of that, there we go. On top of that, this is not a unique problem to books. It is, here we go, you can't see, but I have about 20 magazines here with the exact same cover, okay? Exactly the same. So we see here that we have a lot of white covers with this green leaf, right? So what does this tell us about stigmatization or the cannabis community in general? Well, we see that there's an obvious lack of range here, and that can't just be by coincidence, right? These magazine covers are trying to portray cannabis in a different type of way than it's been portrayed before. So we see back here in things like Time or other magazines, there's really a focus on this the consumption side of cannabis, right? Especially smoking joints or having joints coming from, which is indicative of how they portray other drugs, right? They're trying to portray kind of a negative stigma towards these drugs. But this is having cannabis on a white cover with just the leaf really takes away some of those prior negative stigmatizations and puts cannabis into a different light, almost like we've been talking about, that it's in that it's been curated somehow, right? It's curated as you would see in a fine art museum, and the subject is very carefully placed here in the middle as a symbolic object, right? And usually it's next to something else. So here we see the new Chardonnay book. It's inside of a wine glass, right? Trying to make a comparison to the consumption of alcohol, or perhaps it's alongside, as we see a lot of these dollar bills, right? Connecting capitalism with cannabis. So these are really reflective of what we might call in art or anthropology, this photographic gaze, right? Which is trying to create a perspective of a neutral viewpoint. And especially using cannabis, the leaf, it's really projecting a natural viewpoint of the natural world here. Going off of a 2015 article by Connellan called White, the Color of Whispers, she looked at how white is portrayed in media and art, especially with cultural objects such as cloth from Australia or pearls, pearl diving in Australia as well. Domestic embroidery, and she uses Foucault to talk about how white is inherently linked with power and also linked with colonialism. So if we take some of her work, we can kind of extrapolate from there and think about how white and the cannabis leaf is being used here. So I have a couple ideas on this, and that this representation really is devoid of all of the political and economic context of cannabis production, like we've been talking about, right? It's almost erasing the racial and ethnic history that cannabis has gone through around the world, and also here in the United States. It takes all of that the struggle away and that narrative away. But it also creates a neutral frame, leaving out the human social conditions that currently exist as well, with people like bud tenders and growers and trimmers who are in a relationship with cannabis that includes labor conflicts. So this whitewashing of cannabis covers really is devoid of all of these social and cultural conflicts. The whiteness could also be symbolization or symbolism of whiteness of the industry in general, and that's specific to perhaps here in Colorado. The whiteness of the workers, the whiteness of the people who are owning the capital, right, stemming from colonialism and capitalism in general, and the whiteness of cleansing of the racial history, which I talked about. And these covers are quite ironic in that these aren't really even consumable products. Like I said, a newly harvested marijuana leaf is not necessarily a consumable product like a joint would be. So they're trying to show this in its natural form, right? And I just for fun, I was going through some other looking in preparation for this. And I said, you know, look, let's compare it to other drugs, right? Just to see. Right here we see cocaine. It's in its final consumable product form as a powder, right? And again, they're comparing it to alcohol, but here they are snorting it with a dollar bill, very similar to what we've been seeing. But if this was on the cover of Time magazine, people wouldn't be as scared, would they? Right? They would have a different perhaps conception of what cocaine is. This is the coca leaf. These images aren't as dramatic or scary as like you saw glass. Here as well, we see heroin there with the imagery of the needle, right? The needle, the consumption method. But if Time had the cover of poppy fields, right, of beautiful poppy fields, perhaps that type of symbolism would have changed, right? So I feel like we see this again here with these cannabis covers. So the cannabis, really, they're trying to portray this normative cultural framework, right? That, like we've been talking about, cannabis is now becoming, if not already, an accepted part of people's daily lives. And it's not just about a subculture anymore, right? A subculture of cannabis users. It's about a normative culture of a population that people use, the general population. So this is also reflective of, you know, these new beginnings, which is often symbolized by the color white. New beginnings, new communities, new consumers who are consuming cannabis that weren't prior to legalization. So you can see that this is a much more tidier, fresher kind of look with, again, the color, natural color green. But I'm wondering about some of the stories that we've been hearing, right? What are the stories that are important that we shouldn't be whitewashing, that include labor relations and cultural productions in the production and distribution of cannabis here. So looking at these new curated images, we can see how cannabis has been enculturated into our society, and we can look to destigmatize how we portray cannabis in the media without without having every single cover look exactly the same. How can we portray cannabis's interesting and unique cultural history in a way that doesn't completely devoid the entire representation of the human experience? And so that's what I'm kind of looking to do in this chapter here. And I also want to bring in a lot of the stories that I've collected from the bud tenders who work in the industry as well. And I think it's interesting here in Colorado that we are allowed to even use these print materials, because in places like Amsterdam, they're not even allowed to have the cannabis leaf on any type of advertisement or anything that goes into the public itself. So in Amsterdam itself, often a palm tree is used as the symbolism for cannabis. It represents the relaxation and also a tie to kind of Bob Marley Rastafarianism. But here in the States, that's my timer for me. Here in the States, we do use this cannabis leaf, and we use it in print media, as well as other forms of art, and including fashion, right? So it is very exchanged, and it's exchanged in our culture here, and it takes on new meaning specific to your environment. So I'm looking forward to exploring some of those themes in my chapter. Sorry, I couldn't show you the covers. They are quite interesting, and they will be included most likely in the chapter.
Thank you, Leah. Thank you very much for your presentation. Gracias, Leah, por la presentación. Ahora vamos a tener una
Now
sesión
we're
de...
going to have a Q&A session. We'll take questions from all of you and from the audience and on YouTube. If you're watching us, you can write a question and we'll try to answer it, okay? And the same thing, if somebody here on the Zoom meeting would like to ask a question, just raise your virtual hand. I'll write down the order. Or if you prefer, you can just write it down in the chat and Marty will read them out. And just say who you're addressing the question to. So go ahead. We're gonna have about half an hour for questions. And then we'll continue with the next panel. So go ahead. You're all welcome to ask any question. And if there's something that you would have liked to comment but couldn't, I'm talking about the speakers, well, now's the time to do that. I'd like to add something. I didn't mention how my work in the nonprofit, Hermanos de Color, we have encouraged legalization because with a lot of taxes, they get money for public health, but we get the instruction to use that money to prevent the youth from consuming. So they don't let us use it to help people understand the benefits, for example. So there's a lot of discrimination here still going on. Thank you, Daniel. Questions? So I do have a question for Leah, which is linked to Russell's book as well. Speaking of covers, so Leah, in your research, did you have the opportunity to interview the editors? Because a lot of the time, the authors themselves, they don't choose the covers. It depends on the context, but sometimes they don't. Sometimes it has nothing to do with them.
Absolutely, and I do recognize that. And actually, that's what I think makes it interesting, right? These publishers, it's not the individual people who are writing these books that are trying to do this, right? It's the industry, it's the publishing industry themselves, or the people who choose it, right? Or else they wouldn't all look the same. There's definitely a narrative that they're trying to push, and they is not the authors. And I completely agree with you. Now that I have my back screen off, I completely agree. I completely agree. It's the magazine itself or the book publisher itself, but they're also often combined with other, like for example, magazines when there's multiple articles surrounding a similar theme, they try and add that in, right? So women in weed, instead of a white background, what do they choose, right? They choose pink, right? Because that's representative of women. So, and sometimes they recognize the homogeneous covers and they try and do the opposite, right? So you'll see a white with a green background. And so there are different takes on this, and I completely agree. It's not from the people themselves; it's from the machine, right? It's from the people who are publishing. Yes, and I think they're trying to destigmatize cannabis, but in that destigmatization process, they're also taking away voices that people need to hear. right? So I think that that's kind of the main point that I'm trying to make here.
Gracias, Leah.
I'd like to, can I
Thank you,
follow up
Leah.
on that for just a brief second? Because my experience was the exact opposite, actually. I had to fight the publisher, LexisNexis, to get the flower on the cover, not the leaf. They wanted me, their design team came with wallpapers of marijuana flowers all over the cover. And I was like, no leaf. We're talking about a flower here and the efficacy of its trichomes. And on the back, I made sure I had a macro photo of trichomes. So because this is aimed at lawyers and judges in Canada and hopefully in the States too, and other countries. And nobody knows really, nobody knew before this whole wave of legalization what it actually looked like. And everybody think, oh, it's the flower, it's the leaf. And the fear that's attached to the leaf. So I was like, no, destigmatize it by showing it for what it is, show the flower and show a damn good flower. This is a do-si-do, which I had the pleasure of smoking before I actually wrote the book. So it has grown here in Toronto. So yeah, I think that there's a weird, because I understand putting it on a white cover. Leah's a great observation. Yes, every book is like that. But I think within the legal industry, when you're talking about lawyers and judges, they're so used to books like, this is all they see, right? And so for a lawyer to take a look, so that was my purpose of putting flower on the front.
Thank you, Russell, very much. Gracias, Russell. Voy a leer un par de preguntas.
Now I'm going to read a couple of questions from the chat, and then I will give the floor. So one question is for Leah. How do you interpret the reiteration of the cannabis leaf to talk about marijuana or allude to the marijuana?
Say that again? Question. Yeah, can you repeat that? Sorry.
How do you interpret the reiteration of the cannabis leaf to talk about marijuana?
So I think that I'm still kind of deciding. I mean, that's part of taking part in things like this, is hearing your guys' feedback about how, like Russell said, how their personal experiences doing this stuff also goes into the analysis of these covers. So like, I think a switch, not just talking about the colors, but a switch talking about from consumption imagery to production imagery is quite interesting as well. So like Russell talked about, having flowers, right? Showing flowers instead of things like joints, right? What's going on there, right? And I think we're seeing, like he said, a lot more of this flower imagery being talked about, because again, we're trying to destigmatize it, right? And a cannabis leaf is already symbolic of other ideas as well, right? Going against capitalism itself, stemming from, again, Rastafarianism and other types of things, that cannabis leaves don't just represent cannabis anymore. So we're also looking at how cannabis is portrayed on these covers. So again, like I talked about, the money issue, right? So this is a joint that's rolled with dollar bills, right? This is another thing that we're seeing in a lot of these covers, is having cannabis next to dollar bills. So what does that mean as well, right? What are they trying to tell us? Well, obviously there's a link to the economic development, and my actual background is in economic development and economic anthropology. So thinking about how, like some of the other presenters talked about, how money and cannabis are inherently linked. And I think that also is presented on these covers as symbology, and also are important when talking about how cannabis has now become normalized, right? How did that happen? What does that mean economically for the places that have done that, and for the people in different aspects of this commodity chain? Because as we know, the people at the top of the commodity chain are making a lot, are making different incomes than people at the bottom. So how that money is linked to production and consumption of cannabis. So that's what I think is kind of being symbolically shown here in these covers, and a lot of what these books talk about, which makes sense as to why they chose the covers, right?
Gracias, Leah. Ahora voy a pasar una
Thank you,
pregunta.
Leah. Now we have a question for Scott. The previous question was from Elizabeth. This one is from Nancy for Scott. And Nancy wants to know, Scott, why you decided to make your book so large. She would like to know what motivated you to do that. What did you think in the moment when you made them?
You're on mute.
Is there. What the books are the books are intended to be monumental. I've been there, in fact, counter monuments. The idea was that they would endure, that they, in my view, they contain the traces of a successful insurgency, the only successful insurgency like it in the U.S. history, where people built institutions and actively, at the same time, actively resisted the government. So I felt like this had to be monumentalized. And so these objects are monumental. That's why. That's one reason, and the other belongs to this idea of making them difficult. And yeah.
Scott,
Gracias.
I'm sorry, Scott, for people who haven't seen it, could you just hold it one more time? Hold it up.
Oh, well, which one? This is, I'll show you this one. Oh, no, I won't show you that one. Okay, this is the main volume. Okay, and these aren't, the pages are not filler. I mean, and they're large format. I have a text block. No, I'm not going to show you text block, but yeah, that gives you an idea.
Thanks.
That's one of 5.
Gracias. Voy a proceder a dar la palabra a Marty.
Thank you. Now, Marty, you have the floor.
Thank you. And I just, again, want to congratulate the presenters. And I see a question from Scott to me, and I'll answer that. But I wanted to ask Scott a question, actually 2 questions. Scott, you interfaced with some farmers in the unrecorded or quote unquote illegal sector of farming in Northern California, in the Humboldt area. So I'm wondering, have you more recently reconnected with them to see about their situation in the legalized sector, now that we have a legalized sector? So that's question number 1. And the other question, which I struggle with also, is you held up a sign that said exclusive and expensive art can work against illegal drug life stigma. And my question is, and again, it's a question I struggle with, how does it do that? And related to that, when you talk about expensive art, the struggle we face as academics, our book potentially could be priced out of the market, so people, normal average people, can't access our book. So how do you reconcile this tension of something that's not accessible to people who can't, they can't afford expensive art?
Okay. I have, when I was involved with an artist book collective in New York. This collective worked with a high school in the Bronx to make their yearbook. The collective, because they're all art school students, they decided to do some goofy, in my view, goofy ass thing that didn't look like a book. I mean, for me, when I saw it, I said, "Are you fucking kidding?" I mean, these kids, they want to remember something from their life, and you're making them go home with an art project instead of something where something associated with something in their life. It's true that they worked on it, but so to answer your question, I think that as in the case of the woman and others too, okay, to solve your problem, I don't know what to do. I mean, how do you make sure that you, if you want to dignify something and make something beautiful, it costs money. I mean, there's no way around that. And that's, I mean, as a labor organizer, this is like one of the first things you should know. It's like things cost money. If people are paid properly for what they did, this stuff was all made in my studio. I mean, the printing was done outside. I mean, the printing was expensive. That book, the pages in that book, the pages alone cost $750 to print, not for 2 years of layout, not for 10 years of research, etc. So it's just going to be expensive if you're going to try to make objects that are really, I mean, maybe there are really clever ways around that, and I think that's better. That would be better. I regret that I didn't do more to develop objects that could have come in between, that could have been practically free, that would have kind of been in dialogue with these, so they see this and then there's something else that they can just take away. Yeah, I'm sorry, I'm just riffing. I can't really answer you on the one hand, and on the other hand, but to answer you, I absolutely think. I mean, I'm doing work here with on the subject of drug dealers in parks, and you know, if you wanted, I mean, I made a bronze statue, you know, on a carved oak base pedestal, and you know, that is like, for me, that's like it's a counter monument, but it's also, it's not, you know, it's not fucking around. You know, if you have to find the means to do it. That's so, yes, I do believe that this kind of work can dignify, and it actually in a way has to. It's like appropriating the monumental strategies of dominant culture to, you know, to address stigma. That's kind of the logic.
That was helpful. Thank you, Scott. And let me briefly answer your question,
Yeah, thank
which
you.
I totally appreciate. So Scott's question for me is, why should cannabis business be different in terms of labor relations than any other? Well, that's the problem. They're not any different.
No,
Many other sectors, you know, we're talking about capitalism here. We're talking anti-worker ideology, because the idea is profit, continue a rate of profit. I'm just hoping with all the momentum that we're building up, creating an industry from scratch, that we can use arts-based approaches, in my specific field, video of stories of workers, to help force the sector to be accountable and to be following the law, because there's the laws that exist that say they shouldn't obstruct workers' right to organize. So that's one of my hopes through the work, and then building relationships with people in this group.
Gracias, Marty. Tenemos una pregunta de
Thank you,
Lloyd.
Marty. We have a question from Loida. It's in general for any of the speakers or anybody in the audience who would like to say something. And it says, the context in Mexico is different from the United States. Mexico is only just starting with the legalization process. What do you think about the crime movements that are behind the process of production and consumption of cannabis? So this question could take ages to respond, so I hope you can be concise, because it goes into a lot of topics. If any of the speakers would like to chime in, go ahead. Yeah, I'd just like to comment. Obviously, since marijuana is illegal, it's creating an opportunity for the system to maintain control by a few white people and keep everybody else out of that and criminalized. So when they want to legalize, they're trying to take into account, how can we allow it, permit it, but at the same time, they don't release the prisoners, for example, who were incarcerated for marijuana possession. So they're not really trying to change society around this. They don't want to change the perspective that marijuana is a bad drug, you know? And it's not the same thing with the alcohol, and alcohol is a lot worse. Thank you, Daniel. I'm going to read a couple of
Yeah, may I
comments, then
comment
Homero
briefly?
will have the floor.
Okay, I apologize for interrupting. 2 points about that great question. The first one, there is a book called Drug War Capitalism by Don Paley, which systematically goes through this kind of question that you're talking about. But the second point is, I certainly, as a person from the United States, don't have an answer to this extremely important problem. But I'm interested to educate myself from our colleagues from Mexico. What is the problem with my government that's perpetuating the problem? Because I agree that our government probably has policies that have systematically helped aggravate this problem. So I'm interested to learn more about what you think a person like me could do to inform and educate our government. I'm not hopeful there could be changes, but I'm interested to use my position to try to come up with some kind of remedy or new understanding.
Gracias, Marty. Leo dos
Thank
comentarios.
you, Marty. I'm going to read two comments from Angela. It says, here in Mexico, among activists, they have said that the flowers should be portrayed more than the leaf. Another comment says that something else that we could think about is that the marijuana leaf has also been used as an image to represent drugs in general, banned illegal drugs. One thing that has been insisted upon in Mexico is to differentiate the different substances that are sometimes encapsulated in an inappropriate term like narcotics, which marijuana is not. So now, Homero, you have the floor. Go ahead. Hello, good afternoon. My question is for Marty. First of all, I'd like to congratulate you. I think it's very interesting how you're addressing this in a segment of a powerful industry, which is cannabis production right now in the US and specifically in the region that you're studying. And I think that his topic can lead us to discuss things that relate the entire region. I'm talking about Mexico, the US, and Canada. For example, he is interested in looking at the labor conditions and the worker rights in this industry. And so I would say it would be extremely interesting to compare this context with the Mexican case, because this puts on the table two topics that are fascinating. Capitalism at two different speeds or on two different gears. And why do I say this? Or two different frequencies? Well, because in the US, it's in a context of legalization where, where there's a legal industry now working, where they're hiring workers legally, of course, without fulfilling certain workers' rights. But in the Mexican context, at the end of the day, it's also a capitalist industry. It's illegal and it's criminalized. But in the Mexican context, just to give you an example, in order to recruit workers or growers, that would mean using death threats, and forcing them to stop growing corn so that they can grow poppy seeds or marijuana. So if you refuse to do that, they're going to disappear your family, they can murder your whole family. And then if the army comes knocking on your door, then you're a criminal and you're going to end up in jail, or you can even die. You can die in the crossfire in a fight between the army and the cartels. So we find some population sectors that are highly vulnerable because they are living in precarious conditions in the Mexican rural context. And a lot of them are indigenous people. They're suffering extreme poverty and marginalization. And if they haven't migrated, they have started to participate in this criminal activity within the Mexican context. And it would be interesting to be able to compare the two regions. the two contexts. So I think it would be fascinating, Marty, if you could put this comparison on the table, because for us Mexicans, seeing the contrast between legalization and illegality would be very interesting. At the end of the day, both work under a capitalist system. So that is my comment. Perhaps it's also a suggestion, and I want to see how you react to that. Thank you.
Great.
Thank you, Homero.
Briefly, 3 points. Well, first of all, you raising the issue, you introduced it. So I'm happy to pick up on it and keep the communication alive. I remember early on in this process, I spoke with Dr. Mendeburo about farmers, farm workers in the cannabis sector in Mexico, so I can educate myself on that part of the world. And I'm happy to receive and talk more with any of you that want to look at some kind of comparative project. The other issue is what's fascinating about your contribution, Homero, is the previous question addressed how we're so different. And it's understood in Denver, Canada, even within Denver, me and Leah and Danny are very different and have conflicting, maybe contradictory approaches, but we have similarities, and that's the cannabis that ties us together. So what's nice about this networking opportunity is we acknowledge the differences, but unite around this global phenomenon that we can, as a group, shape to be the way we want it to be, using arts-based approaches and, of course, traditional research. And then thirdly, what's nice about this topic that you mentioned, Homero, is I think half of my job and our job should be to recruit young people, training younger people to find their own topics, whether it's labor issues or capitalism at the global level, and then cultivate leadership so then they can carry the torch and continue with some of the work that we're just beginning. So again, thank you for the question.
Gracias, Marty. Leemos un
Thank you,
comentario.
Marty. We're going to read a comment by Elizabeth. Tomorrow she will be presenting with Aja in one of the presentations, subjects that are also related to the Cáñamo Hemp magazine, and who will be speaking about some of the things that we have discussed today. Here's a question. This is for Danny, and it says, it comes from Pablo Garcia, and it says here that he's from Mexico City, and my project with Cannabis is related to cultural aspects in Mesoamerica, the Mexica, the Nahuatl cultures. I have participated in cannabis ceremonies combined with the Mexican Temazcal. So the question is, how was it that you implemented this connection of medicine with this cosmovision in a different country? And what is the impact that that has? And he even says that he sees on his screen an ASCII code behind you. So Daniel, would you like to answer that? There is a mixture. The Chicano culture, the way in which we adapt our roots, our Mesoamerican roots. I was already involved in the marijuana culture. We were all involved. During a Temazcal ceremony, the person who was guiding the ceremony smoked marijuana in a pipe, and he said, this is the way ancestors did it, but then it was criticized because we are still following the guidelines of the Dakota, the Apache guidelines. And so they didn't like it because they thought that the secret pipe was only meant for tobacco, for other medicine in the northern cultures. So even within native cultures, you'll find there's conflict. But after so many years, we are seeing that marijuana, it's a medicine that can help relax. Same thing with temazcals. It is a ritual to help the body heal, to reduce stress. I have a temazcal facility in my home. I don't use it with marijuana, but I don't have any restrictions. I don't tell people you cannot get into the temazcal if you're smoking, or you cannot smoke it inside. You don't smoke it inside because that's not the way I learned how to do the ceremony. It's not that I am very much involved in the ceremony. I pay more attention to the other elements, Mother Earth, fire, wind, and soil. But anyway, I see that it's just a few people who want to follow the true connection to the culture.
Cultura es algo
Or
que
reality, culture is something that is ever changing. It suffers changes, and culture and marijuana, well, they also mutate, if you may. This is a plant that we have received. It is connected to the indigenous cultures, yes. And we receive it with the positive and the negative. In my line of work, marijuana is just for damage control, if you may. I work a lot with people with heroin addictions, meth addicts, cocaine addicts. So what I recommend is that they use marijuana. Marijuana is good for them to heal because they can help their bodies in the way in which they are getting rid of the other more harmful drugs. But then I'm criticized by, for instance, university people. When they knew that I was recommending marijuana, they made it a big deal. They make a big fuss of it. So each one has an opinion, but if you respect the cosmovision, all plants, and I like what Marty says. What is the purpose of the plant? That is an important thing. And I cannot answer it, but the plant can. The plant is giving an answer in the way in which it is amplifying the subject at the worldwide level. The plant is getting involved in different industries. The plant is drawing attention to itself. The only thing we can do is to respond the best way we can and try not to close our eyes. That's my answer. Thank you, Dan. And then Miriam, who is the person in charge of all of this technical matter, the person who's responsible for the broadcast. And then we will continue with the next panel that is going to be moderated by Hermilo. Miriam, are you still around? Yes, can you hear me? Yes, please go ahead. Okay, we are going to take a small break from the live broadcast because we want to change the audio track. Something that is important for the speakers. Before you begin speaking, please remember to turn off the interpretation mode. In the lower right part of the screen, in the Zoom screen, you can select interpretation mode and you turn it off, please. Because if not, there are two audios that we can hear, and then the translators and yourselves come through the same track and it's impossible to understand. And for our participants, you can select whatever language you want to follow this conversation in using the same interpretation option. That's all. Thank you. Thank you for attention, and we'll be back. Thank you, Miriam. So we're going to pass the floor to Hermilo, who will be the moderator of the next panel.